Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Ancient Epics, the place where the greatest stories of humanity come back to life. Long before maps carved the world into neat borders, and long before written chronicles claimed to tell the whole story of Africa, stone was raised in silence across the eastern lands of the continent. Massive blocks were stacked without mortar, and circles of rock were aligned with the heavens. Many of these monuments still stand today. Weathered by wind and sun, they speak of peoples whose names faded from memory, whose voices were never written down, yet whose understanding of earth and sky rivaled that of any ancient civilization. For centuries, outsiders dismissed these structures as accidents of nature or works borrowed from distant lands, unable to accept that such precision and grandeur could rise from African soil itself. But the stones remained, patient and unyielding. Beneath them lie mysteries of astronomy, ritual, power, and human devotion. Each shadow cast at sunrise, each carving worn smooth by countless hands, carries the echo of an age when stone was language. This forgotten chapter of human history does not shout its truth. It whispers, asking only for stillness and respect. And in that stillness, the ancient world begins to breathe again. In the highlands and valleys of eastern Africa, stone became a bridge between the visible world and the unseen. The land itself shaped this tradition. Volcanic ridges, rolling savannas, and ancient lake basins offered abundant rock, while clear night skies revealed a vault of stars unmarred by artificial light. Communities who lived close to the rhythms of rain, grazing, and seasonal migration learned to read nature with careful attention. Over generations, this knowledge was fixed into stone, not merely as shelter, but as memory. One of the most striking examples rises in the southern reaches of eastern Africa, where granite blocks were quarried, shaped, and stacked into towering walls. These walls curve with deliberate grace, forming enclosures that seem both defensive and ceremonial. Known today as Great Zimbabwe, this complex was built between the 11th and 15th centuries. Yet its roots lie in far older traditions of stoneworking across the region. Each block was carefully selected and laid without mortar, relying on balance, gravity, and skill. Their surfaces patterned with subtle designs that catch the light of the sun as it moves across the sky. Great Zimbabwe was not an isolated marvel. It belonged to a wider stone-building culture that stretched across the plateau, linking trade routes, sacred landscapes, and royal authority. Gold was mined from nearby hills using techniques that involved fire setting and stone tools, leaving behind tunnels that still bear the marks of ancient labor. This gold traveled far, carried along rivers and caravan paths to the Swahili coast, where it entered the wider Indian Ocean world. The stone walls thus guarded not only space, but wealth, knowledge, and power. Yet stone in eastern Africa was not always raised into walls. In other regions it stood upright, reaching toward the sky like frozen gestures of reverence. In northern Kenya, near the shores of Lake Turkana, stands a site known as Namoratunga. Here, slender basalt pillars form alignments that correspond with the rising positions of certain stars and constellations as they appeared over 2,000 years ago. These stones were set by pastoralist communities whose lives depended on the movement of cattle and the timing of rains. The sky was their calendar, and stone became the means to hold that calendar in place. The stars reflected in these alignments were not random. Astronomical studies have shown connections to the Cushitic calendar system, linking the pillars to specific seasonal markers. They signal times for migration, ritual, or preparation for drought. The stones transformed the landscape into a living instrument where earth and sky spoke to one another through human design. Such knowledge required generations of observation, careful transmission, and a deep respect for cosmic order. Farther east in the Ethiopian highlands, another stone tradition took root. At Tia, rows of carved stelae rise from the earth, some etched with mysterious symbols. swords, abstract shapes, and geometric forms whose meanings remain debated. These monoliths marked burial grounds, yet they were far more than simple grave markers. Their placement, orientation, and iconography suggest a ritual language that blended remembrance with spiritual protection. The dead were not hidden away, but honored through enduring stone that linked them to the living landscape. The Ethiopian plateau itself was long considered a sacred space. Its mountains, rivers, and fertile valleys gave rise to powerful kingdoms, including Aksum, whose towering obelisks still stand as testament to advanced engineering and statecraft. Though Aksum is often remembered for its written inscriptions and monumental architecture, it too inherited older stone traditions rooted in the land. The practice of shaping stone as an expression of cosmic and social order stretched back into prehistory, forming a continuous thread through millennia. Across eastern Africa, these stone structures shared a common spirit, even when separated by distance and culture. They reflected societies that understood permanence in a world of change. Pastoralists followed their herds, rulers rose and fell, ensuring that knowledge survived beyond a single lifetime. Colonial-era scholars often struggled to interpret these monuments. Some attributed them to lost outsiders, imagining Phoenicians, Arabs, or mythical civilizations as their builders. Such theories ignored both archaeological evidence and the oral traditions preserved by local communities. Excavations, carbon dating, and comparative studies have since confirmed what the land itself had always known. These stones were African in origin, conceived and raised by indigenous societies using local materials and inherited wisdom. The refusal of the stones to surrender their secrets easily has only deepened their power. Weather has softened their edges, vegetation has crept between their gaps, yet their presence remains commanding. They stand not as ruins, but as witnesses. Each structure holds layers of meaning shaped by labor, belief, and environment. Stone was chosen not merely for strength, but for symbolism. It represented continuity, stability, and a bond with the ancestors whose spirits were believed to dwell within the land. As night fell over these ancient sites, fires would once have burned nearby, casting long shadows across walls and pillars. Stories would have been told, rituals performed, and songs carried into the dark. The stones listened in silence, absorbing the rhythms of human life. Though those voices are gone, their echoes remain locked within the rock, waiting for moments of attention and care. This is only the beginning of the journey into Eastern Africa's stone mysteries. Beyond the visible structures lie deeper questions of cosmology, kingship, and sacred geography. The stones invite patience, asking history to slow its pace and listen more closely. And as the next chapter unfolds, the land itself begins to reveal how stone became one of humanity's oldest storytellers, shaping memory long after words were lost. As the story deepens, the stones of Eastern Africa reveal that they were never isolated achievements, but part of a vast sacred geography shaped by movement, memory, and meaning. Rivers, hills, and valleys were not neutral features of the land. They were active participants in human life, believed to hold spirit, power, and intention. Stone structures were often placed where these forces converged. At crossings of water routes, on elevated ground, or near ancient paths worn smooth by generations of feet. In many regions, oral traditions speak of ancestral founders who chose such places after visions or signs. While these traditions do not describe architectural plans in the modern sense, they preserve a worldview in which building was a ritual act. Stone was not conquered from the earth. It was persuaded, shaped with respect for its origin. Quarrying techniques relied on controlled fire, water, and stone tools, exploiting natural fractures rather than forcing the rock into submission. This careful method left behind quarries that appear almost organic, as if the landscape itself had opened willingly. In the highlands of southern Ethiopia and northern Kenya, Megalithic fields stretch across open plains. Some consist of single standing stones, others of complex arrangements forming avenues or clusters. Archaeological studies suggest that many of these sites date back over 2,000 years, belonging to communities whose economies blended herding, cultivation, and long-distance exchange. Beads of carnelian, obsidian tools, and traces of imported materials found near these stones hint at wide networks of contact that linked inland Africa to coastal trade routes. Astronomy played a subtle yet persistent role in these stone traditions. Clear skies and predictable stellar movements allowed ancient observers to develop precise seasonal knowledge. Certain stones were aligned with solstices, equinoxes, or the heliacal rising of significant stars. These alignments were not abstract curiosities. They regulated life itself, guiding planting cycles, migrations, and ceremonial calendars. When the sky shifted, the land responded, and stone recorded that relationship in enduring form. At Namoratunga, the basalt pillars once cast shadows that moved predictably across the ground, marking the passage of time. Similar principles appear elsewhere, though expressed differently. In parts of Tanzania, stone cairns placed along ridges may have served as both territorial markers and astronomical reference points. Their placement along sightlines toward prominent hills suggests an understanding of landscape as a layered map, where earthbound and celestial features mirrored one another. Stone also became a language of authority. In societies where leadership was tied to ritual legitimacy, monumental building reinforced power without written law. The labor required to raise large stones demanded cooperation, organization, and shared belief. Walls like those of Great Zimbabwe did more than enclose space. They symbolized control over resources, trade, and sacred knowledge. The separation between inner and outer enclosures reflected social order, with access regulated according to status and role. Yet these structures were never purely expressions of domination. They were deeply embedded in spiritual practice. Ancestors were believed to remain present, guiding the living through dreams, omens, and natural signs. Stone structures acted as points of contact between generations, anchoring memory to place. Burial stelae, such as those at Tia, transformed grief into permanence, ensuring that names and deeds endured even as spoken stories faded. The artistic elements carved into stone offer glimpses into belief systems now partially lost. Sword-like engravings may represent protection, honor, or lineage. Abstract symbols could encode clan identities or cosmological concepts understood only within specific ritual contexts. The absence of written explanation does not imply simplicity, but rather a different mode of knowledge transmission, one that relied on initiation, oral teaching, and lived experience. Foreign travelers who encountered these monuments in later centuries often misunderstood them. Some described the stones as ruins of vanished empires, others as evidence of biblical or classical legends transplanted into Africa. Such interpretations reflected more about the observers than the builders. Modern archaeology, guided by local knowledge and scientific methods, has gradually restored context to these sites. Radiocarbon dating, stratigraphic excavation, and comparative analysis confirm long sequences of indigenous development. Equally important are the voices of local communities who have never lost connection to these places. For many, the stones remain sacred, woven into stories of origin and moral teaching. Rituals performed nearby, even into recent times, demonstrate continuity rather than abandonment. Respect for these beliefs has become central to responsible scholarship, recognizing that stone monuments are not inert relics but living heritage. Environmental change also shaped the rise and transformation of stone cultures. Shifts in rainfall patterns, soil fertility, and trade routes influenced settlement patterns. Some sites were gradually abandoned as resources dwindled or political centers moved. Others were repurposed, their stones incorporated into new structures or rituals. This adaptability reflects resilience rather than decline, showing how communities responded creatively to changing conditions. As centuries passed, new religions and cultural influences entered Eastern Africa through trade and migration. These traditions often adapted to existing sacred landscapes rather than erasing them. Stone sites continued to command respect, their presence too deeply rooted to ignore. In some cases, they were reinterpreted within new spiritual frameworks, demonstrating the enduring power of place. The stones thus stand at the intersection of time layers, each generation leaving traces without fully overwriting the past. Wind, rain, and sun have become collaborators in this process, softening edges, darkening surfaces, and embedding the structures ever more deeply into the land. Nature itself seems to acknowledge their significance, protecting some beneath soil while exposing others dramatically against the sky. As darkness gathers over the plains and highlands, imagination drifts back to the nights when these stones were new. Fires crackled, stars wheeled overhead, and human voices carried prayers into the vastness. Stone absorbed those moments, holding them long after the sound faded. In this way, Eastern Africa's mysterious structures are not silent. They speak through endurance, inviting patience and humility from those who seek their meaning. The story now turns toward the deeper symbolic worlds encoded within these monuments, where myth, landscape, and human aspiration converge. There, stone becomes more than material. It becomes memory made solid, waiting to be approached with care and reverence. As the final chapter unfolds, the stones of Eastern Africa stand revealed not as isolated enigmas, but as guardians of a philosophy that once shaped entire worlds. To those who raised them, existence was woven from visible and invisible threads. Land, sky, ancestors, animals, and seasons were bound together in a single living order. Stone, enduring and unyielding, was chosen to hold that order in place when everything else shifted with time. In many traditions across Eastern Africa, mountains were regarded as pillars of the sky, rivers as veins of the earth, and stones as bones of creation itself. To shape stone was therefore to engage with the deepest structure of reality. This belief explains the careful selection of sites, the reverence shown during construction, and the rituals that accompanied both beginning and completion. Archaeological traces of offerings, animal bones, pottery shards, and traces of fire suggest that building was inseparable from ceremony. The positioning of stone structures often reveals a deliberate dialogue with the horizon. Certain walls and pillars frame sunrise or sunset at key moments of the year, while others align with distant peaks that anchor the landscape visually and symbolically. These alignments transformed ordinary days into sacred time, reminding communities of their place within the wider cosmos. Such practices mirror ancient traditions found across the world, yet remain distinctly rooted in African environments and cosmologies. Memory played a central role in this stone-bound worldview. Without widespread written records, history lived in story, song, and place. Stone structures became physical chapters of communal memory, ensuring that knowledge endured even if words changed. Children grew up among these monuments, absorbing lessons not from texts, but from presence. Every path taken between stones, every ritual repeated beneath their shadows, reinforced belonging and continuity. The decline or transformation of certain stone building traditions did not erase their influence. Later societies inherited the landscape shaped by their predecessors, often reinterpreting ancient sites within new cultural frameworks. Some stones became markers of boundaries, others gathering places for seasonal events. Even when original meanings faded, respect often remained, preserved through caution, taboo, or quiet reverence. In the modern age, these structures face new challenges. Urban expansion, agriculture, and climate pressures threaten sites that endured for millennia. At the same time, renewed scholarly interest and local stewardship offer hope. Collaborative research between archaeologists and descendant communities has begun to restore fuller narratives, balancing scientific inquiry with cultural respect. Each excavation now proceeds with awareness that stone holds stories not meant to be extracted carelessly. The mysteries that remain are not failures of knowledge, but invitations to humility. Not every symbol can be translated, not every alignment fully decoded. Some meanings were intended only for the initiated, others for the ancestors alone. Accepting this reminds humanity that the past does not exist solely to be conquered by explanation. It exists to be honored. Eastern Africa's stone structures challenge old assumptions about history and innovation. They demonstrate that complex thought, astronomical awareness, and monumental architecture flourished far beyond the narrow boundaries once imposed by outdated scholarship. These achievements arose not in isolation, but through deep engagement with environment, community, and belief. As night settles once more over plains, lakes, and highlands, the stones continue their vigil. Stars trace familiar paths above them, just as they did centuries ago. Wind moves through grass and along walls, carrying echoes of forgotten songs. In this quiet, the ancient world feels close, not as a distant past, but as a foundation still supporting the present. The story of Eastern Africa's mysterious stone structures is therefore not only about what was built, but about how humanity once understood its place in the universe. Stone served as mediator between worlds, binding human intention to cosmic rhythm. That understanding, though expressed differently today, still resonates wherever people seek meaning in land and sky. In the end, these monuments ask for nothing more than attention and respect. They do not demand certainty, only listening. And for those willing to pause, they offer a rare gift, a glimpse into a time when memory was carved into earth itself and silence spoke as powerfully as words. If these ancient voices touched your heart today, please consider subscribing to Ancient Epics and ringing the bell so you never miss the next forgotten tale. Thanks for watching.